Welcome. So today's session is specifically uplifting the idea of lived and living experience, of peer support, of how do we give space for those who have lived experience to really guide and inform our healing work within our organizations, within our relationships, within the client and practitioner dynamic. Introduce myself very briefly. My name is Oriana Ides, and I am a TA specialist with MHTTC, longtime teacher, and a community-based therapist, and parent and sister, someone deeply committed to liberation and wholeness. So I'll hand it over to my co-host, Falila Bilal, to introduce herself.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Oriana. Greetings, everyone. We're so happy to have you here with us. My name is Falila Aisha Bilal. I am a drama therapist by trade. I'm a community healer. Currently, I work for an organization, Oakland, California, called the Black Organizing Project, but I'm also a mom. I like to say one of my most favorite quotes is, I'm a divine spirit having this human experience. So I'm bringing my divinity and my humanness to this call today. And I'm so excited to be here with all of you.
We did not want to shift away from trauma-informed practice, but we wanted to add on to our understanding of trauma-informed practice and care and principles to also include healing-centered engagement. And healing-centered engagement is a beautiful expansion to the ways in which we are able to center our experience as providers and expand possibilities and potential for care for the folks that we are supporting and serving. We also want to explore the tensions, right, that exist within our organizations, within our own ways of ways we've been socialized, to what we're seeing in the context of today and our efforts and desire for healing-centered engagement, right? Um, just because we believe in it doesn't mean it's always so easy to create in all settings. And then to really amplify lived experience. And that is a part of healing-centered engagement that is critical to healing justice and even trauma-informed principles and practices. And that's been central to this offering. So as I said, we're on the 4th. So if this is your very first or your fourth or anywhere in between, welcome, welcome. Um, Today's agenda, we are engaged in our welcoming and grounding. We'll spend just a few minutes kind of exploring what a shift from evidence-based practice to lived and living experience might mean for our collective healing and growth. And then we are going to engage in a panel discussion with opportunity for question and answer for you all to share in the chat your own answers and thoughts to the questions we're posing, and then we'll have a closing practice.
We're going to make a shift, y'all. We know that in this work as service providers, there has been a tremendous amount of research, data, and focus on certain communities. And there's something that we have been raised with understanding that if something has evidence, if it's based in evidence, if it's based in data and research, that it actually has a certain value to it. There's a way in which the organizations that we work with, the organizations we create, really value this idea of data research. And we're going to shift. We want to look at what is the value and impact of lived experience. What does it mean for us to be learning, to be growing, to be sharing someone's lived and or living experience as being important and just as important as a data collection, right? And so we want you to take a moment to look at this graph here that talks about our practice and how much our lived experience informs our practice. So you notice that big yellow block. Almost 50% of how we practice comes out of what is our lived experience. This is actually the foundation. These are the roots of how we actually do our work, right? What does the community say? How do we prioritize trainings and resources and practices from folks with lived experience? And how do we prioritize that actually over this idea that everything is rooted in research? Because as you know, as someone, I enjoy research, but research tells the story that the researcher is trying to tell. I'm going to say that again. Research tells the story that the researcher is trying to tell. That doesn't mean that the research isn't accurate, but it does mean that it has a lens. And so we are here to explore what does it mean for peer-to-peer practice? What does it mean to have survivor leadership? And what does it mean to really honor lived experience? Something that's very important about lived experience is we know and we believe that it actually counts as evidence, right? When you ask the question, what does lived experience say? What is it telling us? It prioritizes the individual, the client. It prioritizes the survivor. It prioritizes their choices, their power, how different they are, and their circumstances. So we know that uh, evidence-based practice doesn't always honor the individual. It considers, it doesn't always consider what is happening for the survivor, for the client. It tells us this is the best practice and this is what we should do. It asks the question of this is what the research is saying, not this is what the person, this is what my lived experience says. So it's very important for you to open your mind to consider the impact, the intentionality, and the value of honoring lived experience. And we're going to get into it and we're going to hear from our two powerful panelists. They're going to share with us some more about that. And we're going to think about how and why we might better consider the wisdom of lived and living experience. So I'm going to introduce one. Oriana, I'm going to introduce Nola, if that's okay. One of our panelists, her name is Nola Brantley, and she is the founder and CEO of Nola Brantley Speaks. And she is an amazing, powerful leader in the field looking at dismantling and ending the human trafficking of young children. She has for a long time, y'all, over 20 odd years served on behalf of children that have been sexually exploited, children that have been trafficked, children that have experienced a level of trauma that um, should not exist in this world. Nola Brantley has worked locally and nationally on this issue of human trafficking, educating nonprofit leaders, educating city and counties, educating networks of folks dealing in the Department of Corrections. She is a powerhouse, definitely um, someone who I respect and I admire. She's also a mom. She's also an avid lover of music. She's also a lover of nature. And so we're just grateful to have her with us today. And I'll pass it on over to you, Oriana, to introduce our other panelists.
Yes, and both will have the opportunity to introduce themselves in their own words. But our next panelist, I'm so excited to introduce to you all, is Xochitl Larios, who is at an incredible organization called Courage here in the East Bay. Um, she will talk about a program that she contributed to the building of from its inception, that is now offering incredible opportunity for formerly incarcerated young folks. Um, and yeah, I'm just really excited to hear what she is going to add to this conversation. So, with that, I think we will get our um, panel discussion cracking. Ready to start it? We're gonna take down the slide deck and be in conversation. And our very first question is this, and maybe Nola, you can go first if that's okay. But just the opportunity to introduce yourself, briefly share your current work and your journey towards the work that you're engaged in. And if you could also, like, something that you've learned about young adulthood, either through your work or through your own lived experience.
All right. So, as introduced, my name is Nola Brantley, and I'm happy to be here with you all. I love to train and teach and share. So, this is definitely my bag. So, thank you for letting me be here. As Felila shared, I've been working for over 20 years around the issue of child sex trafficking. And in my probably last 5 or so years, I've really expanded my focus to be on trauma, with child sex trafficking being a form of trauma, like poverty is a form of trauma, and like racism is a form of trauma, etc. So that really is where I find myself at today, is training on child sex trafficking and trauma across the state, across the nation, developing curriculums, providing program consultation for those working with young people who have experienced trauma, to help them understand how to help these youth. And the thing that brought me to this work was, I mean, a lot of people know I'm a survivor of the commercial sex industry. I'm a national survivor. I was like the Bay Area poster child for lots of years before survivors really start coming out. So that is there, no doubt. But that's not what brought me to this work, because I didn't even know I was a survivor when I came to this work. I found out that I was a survivor through doing the work, right? So people always think, oh, like, Nola probably started doing this work because she was a survivor. No, Nola didn't know she was a survivor. And, being in this field and doing this work has not only helped me to understand that I'm a survivor, it has helped me to understand my trauma in ways that I may never have understood it had I not gotten to this field of work. So I'm really, really grateful for that experience. That was it, right? One thing that I learned about youth. For sure. One thing that I learned about youth, and it's through just my own experience, is that it takes them a while to develop some awareness and understanding about certain things. So I think as adults, we want them to get it all, while they're in contact with us, which is ridiculous because that makes it about us and not about them. But the reality is, certain things just take time. Certain understanding takes time, certain awareness takes time, and maturity. So I think, there's some developmental things that we sometimes don't consider when we're thinking about how our youth kind of progress along after they've experienced trauma. So the trauma is important, but the other stuff, like the human stuff, the developmental stuff, all the other stuff, I think is really important for us to consider when thinking of young people. So then we just have a lot more understanding for ourselves and for the young people about what is actually going on here.
And I'm guessing I'm gonna jump in after. Awesome, yeah. Thank you, Nola, for highlighting that. Most recently, I just started working more with our Unit 6 young people and in Juvenile Justice Center here in Alameda County. And that's one of the conversations that's often very like triggering for me as a woman of color, as a brown woman, that oftentimes due to evidence-based practices, the approach to addressing young girls being young girls is conflict resolution, room time, split rec, and oftentimes we don't remember ourselves from the community that they come from. They never expected to be in the same unit, coming from different parenting styles, different levels of poverty. Maybe they didn't have parents, maybe they're gang involved, and they just have these punitive fixes. So I just want to thank you so much for grounding us in what is mostly important. My name is Xochitl. I am a sister of two younger siblings and my brother. My mom is from El Salvador and my dad's from Mexico. I recently started to house my father, and that's usually what often happens when you're you're seen as that second parent in the household. And that was for me really important to break that intergenerational trauma because me housing my father, I didn't want to repeat those same cycles in my family where oftentimes we are in this capitalist society where we think very individualistic and we're expecting our parents to serve us, but oftentimes the script is flipped, you know, where we have to parent our parents because, you know, he's not originated from this land, you know, and he came out here through a state program, the Bracero program, where California was actually asking immigrants to come and help with farming. And you know, he fell into that, and over time we lost our house. And you know, my dad has been lost. You know, he was lost in addiction, he was lost in homelessness, and me welcoming him in my home was breaking that intergenerational cycle and diving into that history that the state tried to take away from me. And, you know, with that being said, I met Courage while I was at JJC 5 to 6 years ago. And Courage brought this innovative question of where do you see yourself in 5 years? They brought plant medicine in, indigenous practices that I was very drawn to. And, you know, I took the opportunity through events, etc. And when I finally came home, Courage welcomed me back into the community as a young leader, as not as a client, right? And oftentimes we have to make like those distinguishing men so we know that these are real humans, they're not numbers. And ever since then, I've been going into the facility, doing my own curriculum, working with the young girls and the young men up there, and just doing an innovative curriculum where we're involving them into our curriculum building versus us telling them what they should be learning. And I'll pass it to the facilitators.
I think I'm supposed to ask the next question, but I'm so impressed with you, Sochi, and I'm so grateful. And this thing is an intergenerational healing, you know. Sochi knows my daughter. My daughter is 16, and Sochi has been an inspiration to my daughter. So this is deep, y'all, when we think about folks with lived experience and how touching them touches others. And it can have a personal impact in the way that Sochi and the Courage family has impacted my own daughter. So let me look up the questions because I was just listening and grateful. All right. In your perspective, what have you learned to be the unique experiences and needs of young people 17 to 26 years old in navigating these transitions from being like a child, adolescent into adulthood? So what do you think are unique in terms of their experiences and needs? And Nola, you kind of touched on it a little bit. But yeah, I would love if one of you would like to speak to that.
So, I mean, I always want to leave space. So, Xochitl, feel free to knock me out the box anytime. That's why I paused. But I was thinking about this a lot after I looked at some of the questions, and I really think it's really a complex and a multifaceted kind of, you know, set of needs that our young people have, especially during that age. I mean, that is an age of, there could be so much confusion and, you know, self-discovery and, you know, fears, even without any trauma, just for the average, you know, young person, much less someone that has had challenging circumstances. But some of the things that stood out for me were things like, you know, thinking about things like harm reduction as we do our work with them, so that we're really understanding that, you know what I'm saying, they're not going to be able just to discontinue everything that is undesirable, that we're going to need to think about using that trauma-informed approach where we're giving them lots of choices and making sure that they feel safe. I was thinking of harm reduction. I was thinking of stages of change. You know, so I was thinking our understanding of some of these really great tools, some are even evidence-based. See, I have no problem with evidence-based stuff. It's about who's applying it, okay? Because sometimes people that are applying evidence-based stuff, they just don't have the insight around what the clients need outside of the research, right? I believe in the research as part of it. The research alone, I think, is very useless for clients. But the research combined, you know, with individuals that really understand their lived experiences, difference. And that's where I think we see practices like harm reduction and stages of change really being amplified and considered when you have people that have that lived experience.
Ochi, would you like to add something? What do you think are some of the unique needs and experiences of folks 17 to 26? Which is that your age range? Are you within that age range? And you don't have to out your age to us, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm 24.
24.
I would say, ever since I went back to a facility that tried to punish me for being my mom's brown child, I think that it's important for young people to have an opportunity to come back and addressing cycles of harm. I think that's the opportunity for healing and just kind of like the relational building with young people that are close to your age range, because you allow to share kind of like best practices of what worked for my family that could work for yours. But then I've also noticed that it also helps kind of implement policy changes that oftentimes, like just like Nola said, like it's really up to the person who's implementing it, because their interpretation of research is one way. And as a young person reading research, we have a way total different way of interpreting how to deal with us. And I think my goal, what has been since I've been out and released, was to go back into a space that policy has harmed me, to just include young people that never see themselves in those spaces of interpreting policy, for them to interpret them themselves. And I noticed that to be very innovative, very successful, where we implemented, I co-founded a youth advisory council in collaboration with probation. So there's a council of young people that can actually advise probation on better practices and where the system is broken. And then also, again, I mentioned earlier, allowing young people to tell us as facilitators, as messengers, like, what do you want to see us bring in that can help you, based on what we know as harm reduction, trauma informed, to not revisit trauma, but to reduce it within already a confined setting that's causing more trauma. So I think for me, that's the best way, and that I've just been practicing and talking my walk. Walking my talk.
Thank you. Thank you both so much.
Yes, thank you. I mean, as I'm listening, it's so powerful to hear. One, I'm reminded that healing is incredibly relational, and that if you allow young people to come together, the medicine, the answer, the ways of being are within them. And that's so hard to mine through in the systems that are so violent, right? And do upon or do onto them. And that you are giving such powerful opportunity for young people to be with adults that slow down and listen and take lead from young folks as they discover what they need and who they are. I think the next question we have, I want to share with everyone here, if as you're listening, if you have questions that you want to pose to our panelists, I invite you to share them in the chat, and we will incorporate them into our list of questions for sure. So please find the chat and share your questions, and even if you have answers to some of the questions we're posing, right? What do you all think are the unique experiences of young folks? Please share that in the chat, right? We're thinking emotionally, cognitively, in regards to family and society. So our next question is just an invitation for you to talk about the value you see in uplifting lived experience and healing and recovery and youth development or case management work. And maybe Sochi, you can start this time.
Yeah, I think the value that we see is just again, just different interpretation of law and policy, just a different way to kind of heal together and intergenerational healing, break cycles in families, especially in our young people, because a lot of them, especially like the people that I work with now, have the same stories that I have, where they don't have parents at home. If they do, the parents are also dealing with addiction, it's more specifically, like if you're incarcerated or have that background, your family often disowns you because they're ashamed, right? So you have that stigma of being labeled. So just really removing those labels and just allowing young people to feel and just be in those unique experiences with them without having to push them out further, which pushes them out into their own solutions and building their own community. So just supporting that and just focusing on indigenous roots healing and just constantly breaking that intergenerational trauma.
I think that, for me, lived experience individuals bring a perspective to the work that is very authentic. And I think that it also is very supportive to individuals that have had experiences of trauma. There's a few things. I was just talking to a group about this today, by sharing our own stories and journeys, in terms of not only our healing, but also adversity, we can really do a few things. We can inspire people like to be hopeful. They'd be like, oh, wow, you came from there and this is where you're at. Okay, I have some hope. I think it also encourages resilience, right? This idea of the fact that we can kind of go through really challenging things, but we can still be successful in life. Sometimes people kind of never see an example of that because even people that have the lived experiences, they aren't empowered to speak to them. Which brings me to the next point. I think that it really also, it encourages empowerment by sharing our own stories with others who may be struggling. I also think by involving lived experience professionals in the work, it gives them an opportunity to really connect with individuals that are in different circumstances on a much deeper level than maybe somebody without the lived experience can do. It allows an opportunity to foster a whole lot more trust, a whole lot more understanding, a whole lot more of a sense of shared humanity. It breaks down hella barriers, it reduces hella stigma, and it creates a safe space. And so I value the contributions of those who don't have lived experience, but I do think when it comes to doing trauma work, they should take a side seat, not a back seat. You hear me? They should take a side seat to those of us with lived experience. Our lived experience is no less valuable than whatever folks learn in school. And from my 20 plus years in this field, our lived experience really becomes more valuable than things we learn in school, according to people that have gotten their PhDs and master's degrees that have come up to me and said that. And said, in all the schooling I got, Nola, I didn't learn many of the things that you were able to teach me based on your lived experience. And I also wanted to highlight what was said by my co-panelist around policy. I think that was so important, what was said about creating policies that really are responsive and inclusive of the populations. And I think that is a big piece of how lived experience experts contribute to the game, like on all fronts. Like I know we all work in different areas, but like in my area of human trafficking and sex trafficking, you wouldn't imagine how survivors have changed policy in this nation, including myself. I wouldn't imagine that we could do this, but it is possible and it makes a huge difference.
Can I add like a perspectives point A question to this? Do we have time, Oriana? Okay, so in your work, both of you locally and nationally, do you see, I know at your agencies, the one you founded, Nola, and the one that you work at, Xochitl, I know you see a value there, but in the larger scheme of the work, do you see that folks are valuing the lived experience? And if they are not, are you able to have these conversations just to think about changing of organizations, shifting of perspectives?
I feel like they are more now than they have in the past, but I also feel this way, and you could tell me whether or not you agree with this, Xochitl. Sometimes they value us when they get desperate. Mm-hmm. Oh, now they don't know what to do. a population's out of control, their backs up against the wall, and now all of a sudden we're heard and listened to now because they run out of options, right? But what we had to say was valid all along. So I have seen a bit of that. And at other organizations, sometimes I do see lived experience experts be treated like second-class citizens.
Yes, yes. I think what it is, ever since I joined Courage, I never really knew the sense of like centering the voices of those most impacted or closest to the problem or closest to the solution. I went through this fellowship called the Dream Beyond Bars Fellowship. And in my mind, I was fresh out. I needed a job. They were paying me to basically join a fellowship. This was very new to me. And we worked on this report, which was an Alameda County vision to kind of de-incarcerate or end youth incarceration in 2018. And we actually we did a town hall and we invited all system partners on probation because that was our target. And they were really receptive. They were, I think we had some board of supervisors there. We had the district attorney there, and we had youth demands. And I think the demands that we had now to the work in youth organizing that we have now, I think we were really realistic. And to them, they were still trying to fit us in a box and kind of again like interpret policy where it's meeting like their agenda. And I started to learn that if we want to end youth incarceration, we have to shift their jobs. We have to do things that is living in collective and coexist them also with the opposition, and I had to bring that to the work because, to be honest, to keep it a bug, we are in like right what Nola said, like this is like we have to look at race too and how the state positioned themselves and giving really good paying jobs at juvenile institution officers because they're most of them are Black and brown institutional officers where they have to remove their identity to meet the state's job duties of incarcerating young people. So now we're talking about demands to our people, that are in those conditions. So I think that is where youth organizing is right now and in the work that we're doing with Courage. So we kind of shifted and said, okay, well, let's bring our radical agenda to the voters. Let's see what the voters are talking about because we are opening up by 2024, actually in 2 to 3 months, the Oscar Grant Youth Power Zone. So we are in this political climate where we're highlighting stolen lives by state violence and creating a youth power zone where young people can be themselves and removing, because we know probation is not community supervision, it's surveillance, it's state surveillance where they have to meet conditions. And when we talk about mental health and what young people need, we often age out or we're not meeting those labels where we can actually be where we can have sustainable mental health care. So we're really asking the voters to really think out the box with us. And I think for us and Courage and the work that I'm doing, that's where we're at.
Really, really powerful. And, it's interesting because I think coming from the Bay Area with all of the different types of programs we have and this intention around connecting youth development, case management, healing centered work with social justice and like principles of liberation and revolution, there's such a alignment of how we practice. And this piece about lived experience is also connected in that. Who's the best person to tell you about incarceration or the penal system? Is the person that's actually experienced it as someone that's been incarcerated and as someone that's worked in that system. So I appreciate you lifting up who the guards are, right? And how they have been used to help subdue us, how they have been used, and capitalism uses them as the mechanisms to provide for their family, but to also commit some heinous acts and to be desensitized. The next question, Oriana, they already answered. And the next question was really about in centering lived and living experience, your work, both as employees of an organization and with the people you serve. How is that different than solely relying on evidence-based practices? And I feel like Nola spoke to that earlier, but maybe I'll modify the question a little bit and just say, have you experienced in any successful successful situations where evidence-based practices and lived experience has been combined? And if so, how can you share with the participants of this call examples of ways to bring both of them into the fold?
I'll speak to this because this is what I do through my training model, and I'm out here doing this actively right now. So several years back, and this is not, direct services, but it's into our field. And so I want to share it. I joined forces with the psychologist. And so we provide trainings under what we call a survivor clinician training model, on trauma to people like folks right here. And so when we're providing trainings in that model, she comes from a theoretical and evidence-based perspective in what she's presenting. I come from a lived experience and practical perspective, and we combine those in the training as a hybrid delivery that we feel like gives folks in our field the best possible information from both perspectives. So that has been really successful. We also put together a team of about 7 therapists, a psychologist with 7 survivors who for 3 years went across the nation and did training for social workers and POs and stuff. And it was very, very successful. And I also believe that kind of model could be replicated. What I believe within social services, mental health, I believe that's what it should be. A lived experience expert and someone that has another area of expertise outside of the lived experience realm.
I just want to add to that. Thank you for bringing that up. That actually reminded me that recently in Alameda County's behavioral health, they so ever since a new bill SB 23 passed in California, where we knew that young people were going to be under county care and not the care of the Division of Juvenile Justice, formerly known as CYA, and we know those harmful practices. So now that our young people here in Alameda County Juvenile Justice Center and all centers across the state if you commit a crime that's going to keep you locked up long-term, you will be locked up long-term in a facility that was never meant for long-term lockup. So behavioral health actually came to me and asked me, like, what do young people need from us to make sure that we're meeting their well-being? And I think that just expresses like what Nola is saying, like sometimes our lived experience informs best practices or what policy should be. And it's a collaboration. So because they're the experts in that field, right? They're doctors, they went to school for that, but they know, just like Nola mentioned, like when they go to school, it doesn't teach them to be in the shoes of those people. It just tells you like to learn from them, do research, observations, different methods. And I think that's a real example that actually happened. But also creating youth feedback loops. That's one of the things that I really suggested, is that if you're gonna implement things, also have constant youth feedback loops, because if this is a new population that counties have not really dealt with, incarcerated for 3 years up to the age of 25, you don't want to create another punitive system. That's why we closed down the Division of Juvenile Justice, where you're further harming young people. We want to make sure that what's working is relevant, it's fresh, and it's actually including young people in the conversation. And one of the examples that they did was they were talking about opioids, and do they know about opioids, because a lot of things were going on inside. And behavioral health's approach was, let's create a survey so we know what young people do know and not assume due to research what we think young people already know and what they already using, because research says one thing, but when we look at this population and we actually are talking to the population, something else comes up. So it's really important to just partner up with those young people constantly and those people that have those lived experiences.
Wonderful contribution as well in the chat. And one thing that was highlighted is how often folks with lived experience are not supported within their organizations or paid like livable wages. And so the dependence on them is heavy, but the support offered to them and the real value is not necessarily there. And so I think that leads really beautifully into the question that we had next was around what are the right conditions within your organization or organizations to amplify and support peer support specialists or those with lived experience in our organizations. And I'll just say, being a part of this network and these offerings, it seems like Washington State has the peer support specialist role. It's a certification that seems to be really honored and revered in Washington State. I might be wrong. This is just my perception, and I don't see it yet making its way here to California, definitely not the Bay. And so, yeah, just what are your thoughts around that? And if anyone also wants to chime in chat, and in our participants, you're welcome to do so as well. What do you think we need to consider when creating the right conditions to honor, amplify, and support peer support specialists or those with lived experience in our organizations?
I would honestly say definitely maybe start a fellowship. I think Nola said it beautifully, just create that safe space, but also let it be paid, because we know that um people with lived experiences, we need to pay them for their expertise and their time. And I've learned that to be very valuable in giving kind of like those partnerships. And then I would say talk to your executive directors to make sure that those people have a vote, they have a say, they have a specific role, and what and just understanding what their role is. And just be innovative. I think sometimes we live our everyday lives and we do what we do, but it's sometimes we either are stuck in our own practices or beliefs that we don't think outside the box. So that would just be something that I experienced to be helpful and successful.
Can I add on what has courage done specifically to support you in feeling whole and sustained?
Yeah, so one of Courage's mission was that um ever since they became ever since the organization started growing, they made sure that all our young leaders were gonna, and not young leaders on staff, were gonna be paid at least 65,000 a year to have some form of livable wage. And then for our fellows, that they were gonna get paid starting at 22 an hour to getting a raise up to 25 an hour. So I think Courage just making sure that their mission was unlocking the leadership of young people, not by being extractive, but being kind of being very considerate that us young people, we're still trying to get our lives together. And if you're asking us to be part of a social movement, that we also need to get paid, because it's really hard. And yeah, I think for me, that's something that Courage has helped me with, or in times of struggle. For example, I'm currently as foster youth, my AB 12 housing was extended because the county gave organizations extra funding. So I'm currently 24, but I got extended a year. So when I turn 25, my housing will be over. But Courage has helped me pay rent in times of need, because they know that that's literally what young people need. And most specifically, like if you're asking them to be part of like a bigger like story, like a bigger movement, you need to meet them where they're at. And oftentimes we forget that when we're trying to ask these type of people to the table, because how it's really hard to go from like in my experience from like incarceration to give myself to a movement. Like I have to work on my barriers first before I can give my all. And oftentimes we forget that people still have barriers to be their full selves in this capitalist society. So oftentimes I have to um say no when it comes to things that I know that I can do it, but I can't because I'm stretched so much. And then I have my mom homeless, I have my dad homeless. You know, I'm being an older sibling, being like playing a parenting role. So just thinking about like where the people that we're trying to talk to and bring to the table also, like what does it mean like when we create a safe space? So just yeah.
Soji, can I say one thing here, Oriana? I just want to lift up that I respect you and I appreciate your presence and I appreciate what you're sharing as sacred information about yourself and your family. And I hope that all the listeners on this call um, feel honored to even be able to hear a slight portion of your lived experience right now as we sit behind these computers and we learn from you. I just want to lift that up and not to be taken for granted that one of the consistent conditions that are happening is capitalism, and the way that it has impacted our families is intergenerational as well. And thank you, Catherine, for that. Yes, one of the things as a therapist, as a mental health person that served all kind of folks, but have chosen to work with young people and young people of color specifically, in looking at like the white mental health field, they have a lot of choice. The folks that are looking for who's going to serve them. Oyana's looking at me like, don't go off, Falila, don't go off. But there's a lot of choice in terms of who services you and what degrees they have and where their office is located and what type of therapy they practice. And if folks on any level, the biggest determining factor is just your economic status in terms of you having choice or you being forced into certain conditions and having to respond from them. So I just needed to say that as you're sharing things, because one, it's your sacred story, and two, it's important for us to recognize that adults with all the supports in the world and all the money in the world still have the same challenges, but don't get judged and don't get put in systems and put in cages associated to dealing with that. So yeah. So back to the question. Excuse my rant, but it's how I feel very strongly about it. Um, when we think about what organizations could do better in terms of honoring and amplifying the voices of lived experience, I don't know, Nola, if you had something you wanted to add to that.
Of course.
Thank you.
So I just wanted to appreciate what was said already and just agree with the fact that especially for young people with lived experience, y'all need to get paid. And this is one thing I want to say from what you just said. It's like, it's not like they're doing you a favor. Like they're getting stuff from you that's invaluable. And that's what I tell young survivors. Like, are you kidding me? What we're giving them is stuff they can't get out of a book. It's us. It's all of us in so many ways. So it's like it has a dollar value attached to it. Okay. And when I worked at Missy in Oakland as a survivor leader, they didn't want to pay me what I was worth, and I had to fight really hard to be compensated. And at one point, I gave them an ultimatum, like, pay me this or I'll go work somewhere else. And they ended up paying me that and also chastised me about giving them an ultimatum. And what they were paying me was still below the poverty level for the Bay Area. Now, and this is why I want to tell you what we have is valuable. But when I left that organization, right, when I decided, okay, you know what, I'm gonna step out on my own, I made my whole month's salary in 3 days. just as me, a lived experience expert. Are you hearing me? So, but reeling myself back into, I'm like you, Falila, I'm about to go off. Some of the things that I think are important, to amplify those individuals and organizations is cultural sensitivity. First and foremost, like there's all different type of survivors from all different type of situations. And we should not, kind of lift up some survivors, but then other ones kind of push them down because they're not as popular. So I think really looking at all survivors and their unique experiences and really being inclusive. Like in the sex trafficking movement, a lot of times survivors that identify as LGBTQ+, I feel like sometimes they're like outside of the movement. And so there's been some survivors that really have been fighting to make sure that they're included in everything. We have to, really consider a trauma-informed approach. So just understanding trauma and the impacts it has on people really helps us with empathy and compassion when those people are working on our teams. It doesn't mean that we don't see them as humans outside of their trauma, but we consider that trauma and can have that empathy and compassion. I also think around empowerment and letting people have a sense of autonomy, right? So we all have unique perspectives. So lifting that up, it's not just a survivor perspective. Each survivor has a unique perspective. And then also making sure that they are encouraged in terms of decision-making and in terms of leadership, not just in terms of offering to us what we need to make whatever we're doing be legitimate. You know what I'm saying? Two more things I'll say is self-care and wellness. And this is something I wish I would have, received as a younger lived experience person, but prioritizing self-care and wellness initiatives for those doing peer support, especially when they are lived experience. Like we should not be asking them to give to our organizations if we're not offering the resources, the support groups, and the mental health services to promote their well-being and their resilience. And then lastly, just the opportunity for continuous growth and learning. That's another thing I wish I would have had more of, is just ongoing training, professional development, opportunities for mentorship to enhance my skills and knowledge, not assuming just because I was a survivor, that's all I needed. That's all you need. And whenever we need that from you, we'll come take that from you. You know how much life it gives me to hear this younger lived experience expert talk about these fellowships and getting some of these things that she needs. I was over here just like, oh my God, thank God for change. So I know that the lived experience has changed over the past 20 years because I'm 48 and she's 24. And what she's getting is a hell of a lot more different than what I got in a positive way.
Yes, 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 yes. And we still have a long way to go in the field of really honoring the experience of survivors. We have a long way to go in lifting up how we are dealing with, supporting, and just being in connection with those that have lived experiences. So Ashe, thank you so much. Go ahead, Oriana. I'm
Well, no,
quiet.
I just I want to say that we have about 7 minutes left in this part of the conversation. I just want to open it up to participants. If you have questions that you want to pose our panelists, like now is the time. I saw someone come off, put their camera on, and so I don't know, maybe you have a question you want to pose one of our panelists, but now is the time and space for that. All right, how can employers encourage professional development and obtaining credentialing if wanted?
So I would say it's really important. Like, first of all, it's important that your staff are receiving supervision. And I don't mean a supervisor telling them what to do.
Yeah.
I mean some supervision from a clinician where you can process what you're experiencing in the work. So I just want to say that because that's going to, like, some of the times when we're not like moving towards things, it's because trauma isn't standing in the way of our goals and ambitions. So I think, having that clinical support to connect to your professional goals is really important. But I also think checking in with people regularly, sitting down with professionals, peer specialists, and saying, what are your professional development goals? Helping them develop a professional development plan. I'd be telling people, if you work at an organization and you're not gaining those skills, they just using you and about to run you dry. So even if they don't offer you training, you better tell them you want to take training. And if it's a place that won't let you do that, then you need to go, because that means you're just about to get used up. So I think really, encouraging those opportunities, having conversations, creating plans, I think all of that is really important, and letting people know why you're doing that. If you have lived experience and you don't come from like academia, you might not understand, hey, we need to do this with you because you need to be able to move around. And so if you want to stay here, great. But if you want to go somewhere else, you need to have the skills to do that. And just doing this job and not getting any other skills will kind of have you trapped where you're at now.
Yep.
And just to add to that, one of the things that Courage actually just currently did, they actually gave us like a $300 budget. So every time I have meetings with my supervisor, like she's always reminded me, you have $300 each quarter or something like that, and any professional development that you want to take. But then also Courage allows some of our, if you're a full-time employee, to use some of your time, like just like Nola said, like create your plan, like what time are you asking for to do school, to follow those credentials, because maybe if your organization can't pay for it, then they should be able to still pay you full time to be able to, for you to meet those credentials, for you to conduct the job that they hired you for. I don't think that should be a point of discrimination where you can't further practice your career if you don't have those credentials, but the organization or agency should support you in those ways for you to carry those credentials, because we know that we're in a world where a piece of paper just goes a long way nowadays, So those are the two things that I would add that has been helpful for me.
Thank you. I think the wisdom that came from response to that question was so important in today's conversation. So if you have a question on the tip of your tongue, this is a reminder that that was a beautiful response that was necessary for today's conversation, to hear these pathways that can be created. And please, ask your question. The last question we had was, what is your dream or vision for young adults as they grow through your organization? What do you think is possible given the context of this very moment? And thinking relationally and structurally, like what changes might need to occur for that vision? It's a really big question, but we have maybe 2 minutes for each of you, or 1 minute for each of you.
I'll go quickly. So right now, ever since I've went back into the Juvenile Justice Center, I know that I've been very vital for my organization to meet their goal of ending youth incarceration, because you need a coordinator that understands both sides to come in and make sure that young people coming out of the system have a Courage home to go home to. So I just want to keep expanding that. We currently are in the facility on Thursdays and at our Camp Sweeney facility, where young people are stepping down so they can be part of our Dream Beyond Bars Fellowship. So now we have young people directly incarcerated being part of our Dream Beyond Bars Fellowship while getting paid, while their voices are being centered, they're being part of political conversations that are being talked about themselves. So like policies that are being implemented, interpreted, where young people that are going to be directly impacted by those policies are in those conversations. So my dream is to just continue expanding that and allowing young people, again, to have that safe place in the Oscar Grant Youth Power Zone that will be opening really soon.
My hope is that, given, the context of now, we know there's a lot of systemic inequities and social injustices. There's intergenerational trauma that really impact the youth and their experiences. But I believe it's possible for us to create meaningful change by really doing what we're doing here, centering, right, the needs and the experiences of those young people that we serve. I think it's really important to foster authentic connections, to build trust, and to create safe spaces for them to be seen, heard, and valued. I think that is so important. And structurally, I think, obviously there's a lot of barriers we need to dismantle, as was already said. We need to challenge the systems, which some of us, work for the system. So that could feel risky. That's why I don't work for the system, because I need to be outside of it. But even inside of it, we could be very, very helpful. And we need to advocate for policies that really promote that sense of equity and justice and social change, that really show that we're moving towards something different and more equitable. So yeah, that's how I'm going to use my 1 minute.
As we are closing this up, like deep gratitude for your energy, your heart, for the precious life experience that you shared with us here in this space. I want to invite participants in the chat to please share an appreciation for Nola and Xochitl, something you heard today come out their mouths, something that you felt today in their presence, right? Something you are hoping for as a result of this experience here. It'd be so beautiful if you could share in the chat. Maybe it's a word that is still bumbling around in your mind or your heart, right? Maybe it's a wondering you have, but as we are bringing this conversation to a close, please capture in the chat what is sitting with you. And also, I see folks sharing some powerful resources. So please share resources as well. We have 2 minutes left. There is never enough time for this, and gotta trust that we will always find the time.